Hello. Okay, we are going to get started momentarily. But first, some housekeeping. Please put yourselves on mute. So if you're not muted, please take a moment right now and put yourself on mute. If you are a credentialed member, meaning you have the RP credential or the PRP credential, please put your first and last name and your email in the chat.
For free help, call 1-800-QUIT now.
Please put yourself on mute. We do hear some feedback. Thank you. So if you are a credentialed member, meaning you have the RP or the PRP credential, please put your first and last name in the chat and your email address. Okay. All right. Well, it is 7:01, parliamentarians of Bucks County. So I believe we'll get started. So we're having a little technical difficulties this evening, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to push through. So
I think I can hear now.
Oh, okay, we have you. I was getting ready to say on behalf of our president, but here she is, Kamala Allen. Take it away, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Nikki. So first of all, good evening, everyone. So good to see everyone this evening. We're excited about this evening's presentation. I'm going to be extremely brief in my opening remarks. I'm just trying to see if we have any of our dignitaries from across NAP, from the various districts or other state associations. And maybe, Nikki, if you can help me if I missed anyone. I do see PRP Patricia Cawley, who has watched us mentor and proctor so many RP exams. PRP Cawley, would you like to say hello?
Good evening, everyone. I'm just so delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much.
We're glad to have you. We're very glad to have you. Thank you so much. And again, if anyone else is either appointed or elected officer of NAP or of any of the various state associations or units, please come off mute and we invite you to bring brief greetings to the group before we get started.
Hey, good evening. This is Dan Brown. I'm the parliamentarian for the New York State Association, chopping on to get some gems. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We're glad to have you. We're very glad to have you. Okay, so and if there's anyone who comes on later, we know that they're going to know that we're grateful for them to them for joining us this evening. So I'm going to move into introduction of our featured speaker for this evening. Registered parliamentarian Ellen Reaves is a member of the Parliamentarians of Bucks County. She has worked for the New Jersey Judiciary for the past 23 years as a court services supervisor and has been appointed as a parliamentarian for the Mid-Atlantic Association for Court Management. In 2021, Ellen became a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians and earned her registered parliamentarian credential in that same year. She is one of our charter members and she currently serves as the unit vice president. Ellen was recently elected as a parliamentarian for Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to begin her presentation and ask you to please, those of you who've been with us before, we use the chat. So if you have questions as Ellen's going through her presentation, please put your questions in the chat and we will do our very best to answer those on the back side of her presentation. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ellen Reaves, RP.
Good evening. Thank you to everyone that is in attendance. I am very appreciative. You're in for a treat today. We're going to talk about crafting a brand new set of bylaws. But to get you in the right frame of mind, I want to tell you a little bit of a story, just to kind of put it in context. So at my one of my previous positions, I was asked to take part in a friendship cake. I don't know if you know what a friendship cake is. It's like a chain letter, but with cake batter. So what the premise is, basically you start off with a basic set of ingredients, right? Someone gives you a bag or a jar full of yeast and maybe some flour. And you are to take this and you are to hold on to it for probably a week or two. And each day you have instructions to add different ingredients. So maybe the first day you add a little bit more yeast. The second day, you add a little bit flour, a little bit of liquid, and you continue this for a couple of days. And after about a week or so, you have a huge amount of cake batter. And the last part of the instructions involves you adding the last little bit of ingredients and you then dividing your mixture into 5 different batches. You give out 4 batches and you keep one for yourself. So the last one that you keep for yourself is yours. That's what you're going to bake your cake, right? But before you do that, you're going to add your own ingredients, your own spices, your own liquid, you know, whatever little bit of ingredients that you need to bake your own cake. So I want you to think of crafting this set of bylaws as your own cake that you're going to bake. I'm here to give you the foundation, the beginning ingredients. We're getting a little bit of feedback. If we could keep everybody muted, that would be appreciative. But again, I'm here to give you the basic foundation, the set of ingredients that you need to add your own afterwards, and you're going to make it yours. So I hope you can just kind of think of that. So think of whatever it is that you need to take from this and craft your own set of bylaws. So my role today is to make sure everyone here gains the knowledge regarding how you make up your bylaws committee. My focus will also be to help you understand the articles and what should be in the bylaws, the content, right? The specific verbiage. And lastly, I plan to make sure you understand how to interpret the bylaws, because there is a certain sense of nuance to this. And you know what? My internet, I'm getting a message, so I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'll come back on as well in a little bit, just to save some bandwidth. Thank you. All right, so let's look at how I'm going to accomplish today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the governing documents and where the bylaws fall within that structure. We're going to talk a little bit more about the basic information as to what bylaws really are and why they're so important. Then I'm going to talk about the makeup of the bylaws committee. I also mentioned we're going to review the contents, what should be in the bylaws. Then we're going to go into interpretation of the bylaws, give you some last little pointers for grammar and language, and then we're going to practice and review. And as mentioned, please feel free to put in the chat any questions you have, and we'll make sure to address it towards the end. We'll leave a little time for that. So this is a quote that I want to begin with because it puts us also in the right context, because the whole premise is to keep it simple, right? Don't make it overburdensome. Don't make it overcomplicated. Write bylaws in a simple language, because no one needs an advanced degree to understand them. I really, really think this quote is so appropriate for what we're going to talk about today. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I will be just skipping through some items, but we're going to cover the basics. So let's talk about the governing documents and where the bylaws fit into the whole scheme of things, right? So there is a whole separate training on the hierarchy of rules, and that's a training for another day. But I wanted you to see where the bylaws fit in the hierarchy of rules. First and foremost, you have your laws, right? Your federal laws, your state laws, laws on a local level in your municipality. If you are part of a national organization, Your governing documents also has a place in this. So you would be, you would set up your corporate charter for your organization, and then the bylaws would fit right here after the corporate charter. Again, if you are part of a national organization, you also have to remember to, as you're constructing your bylaws, that it has to be in sync with your other higher documents, right? With the other documents that are of higher authority. So they must not conflict. Now, there was a period of time in our history in which organizations would combine the Constitution and the bylaws, but now it's recommended that it's one document, because before this, it used to be two separate documents, but now it's recommended that a combined Constitution and bylaws to help you run your organization. And if you have a separate Constitution, it is of higher authority, and it needs to be made more difficult to amend than your bylaws. And as you can see, the other rules in this hierarchy: special rules of order, your parliamentary authority, standing rules, and your custom. And again, this is a training in and of itself, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. All right, so let's go right into the information about bylaws. What are they and why are they so important? So the bylaws are the basic rules relating to itself as an organization. That means that these are rules that are so important that it helps to define the function and how the society is formed, and how it operates, in a sense, right? These bylaws cannot be suspended except for clauses that provide for their own suspension. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So if your organization is in the process of going through elections, and you have, let's say, the position for secretary, and a person running for this position doesn't have all of the qualifications. And if your organization, right, wants to give this person an exemption for that position, it has to already be in your bylaws that the qualifications can be suspended. So that's an example of a clause that needs to be in the bylaws in order for you to carry it out. So I hope that makes sense. So let's get the other one here. So what are the bylaws? They provide the order and reason for the operations of the organization, and it gives protection to the members, whether they're present, whether they're in the meetings, or whether they're not in the meetings. It describes the rights, the relationships, and the obligations of the members, whether it's you have members, whether you have directors, officers, or staff. It really defines all of these relationships and how they're interrelated, right? And these are so important to the society that they cannot be changed without previous notice to the members, right? And a very large majority to vote in order to have any of the clauses suspended. So when you are forming a new society, one of the first things that you do is elect a president pro tem, and then you entertain a motion to decide who the makeup of the bylaws committee will be. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and who should be on it. Again, this is really done at the very first organizational meeting if this is a brand new organization, a brand new society, right? It should be made up of people who are interested, people who have special knowledge, special skill. You should consult with a parliamentarian. You should have legal counsel as well. So these are just suggestions of who should make up the initial bylaws committee when you are drafting it, right? Talk to other experts in the field. It's also important to not just have anyone on there, right? Some people who really are good writers and can do the proofreading. It's also recommended that you look at other organizations of the same type. So for example, the parliamentarians of Bucks County, if they're in their forming stage, right, when they are trying to craft their bylaws, they would check with the parliamentarians of Montgomery County or, you know, another organization of the same type, just to give them some guidance, right? And one of the most important things I want you to remember goes back to that quote, keep it simple, right? And should not be made more restrictive or more detailed than necessary. That means, you know, you don't just throw the kitchen sink in the bylaws. You have to be very specific about the wording, because when we talk about interpretation, you'll see how it's just very, very important. So the other things I wanted to mention is if this is the first time that you're crafting the bylaws, you should have to think, you know, in the future, right? Are all of the bylaws going to be effective immediately, or will some need some sort of provision to take into effect afterwards, right? So the bylaws themselves, they are, you know, the document is, it goes into effect immediately, but there may be some clauses that need something to happen before it becomes effective. So you have to think ahead of time when you're crafting the bylaws, right? And when the bylaws committee puts the first draft together, they will do it and present it to the body in their report at the organizational meeting. And they'll present it section by section. They call it seriatim. And each section is open to an amendment. And you have to keep in mind that it must not conflict with the other articles of incorporation. So you have to look at it in context, right? And I talk here about the majority vote is only required to adopt an initial set of bylaws. A negative vote on their adoption can be reconsidered, but not an affirmative vote. So basically, once you adopt it, it's real, okay? Now let's talk about what actually goes into the contents. And there is a way here of helping everyone remember the initial articles. Now think back to what I was talking about with the foundation, right? These are just the suggested articles initially that should make up your bylaws. No mommy CPA. That's just the an acronym for name, for object, for members, officers, for meetings, executive board committees, parliamentary authority, and amendment of bylaws. The articles themselves, when you write them, should be in Roman numerals, and the sections are in Arabic numerals. There may be additional articles that are needed, and I list a couple of here. So if someone could also write in the chat any articles that you've seen that we haven't gone over. So I'll give everybody a minute to jot in the chat. Just kind of give me a couple, and I'll ask my tech committee if they will let me know. But here's just a few extra ones that you may need to add in addition to the original 9 that we're going to go over individually. So do I have any other articles that you've seen in bylaws?
No responses yet.
Okay, but keep in mind, other than what I have listed here, you might need a separate one for finance, for dues. If you have specific departments, you may have a code of ethics. If you have specific chapters, and if you're a national organization, you may have different units on a regional or state level. So all of these additional bylaw articles may be necessary beyond the initial 9. But let's go deeper into the specific ones that I mentioned. So Article 1 should have the name of the organization, the actual spelling, and the punctuated properly name of the society. If, for example, if you have a separate constitution, this article can actually be omitted. So no need to duplicate it here. Article 2 is the object. This is so important that it's very brief and it's very general, because it's going to set up your boundaries for the business that's conducted and introduced in your organization. So let me give you an example. If your primary activity for this organization, your mission, because that's what we're talking about here, your mission, right, is to do community service for preemie babies, introducing a motion for the group now to talk about credit counseling, that's out of order, right? It is out of the scope of your object, out of the scope of what your organization was set up to do. So that's why the statement should be general enough that allows flexibility, but specific enough that everyone understands what type of business and what can be introduced. And a 2/3 vote is required to introduce anything new that falls outside of the scope. So it's not impossible to do something different, right? But you have to recognize it takes a higher threshold for a vote to allow business outside of the scope to be introduced in a meeting for your organization. So let's move on to Article 3, the members. So this article should talk about the different types of membership you have, the classes, the qualifications, and all of the information for eligibility. If you're a national body, if you're a national organization, your members might be local units instead of individuals, right? You might have units or states or some other type of class of membership. And if you need a separate article for financial obligations, it might go here or it might go in another article. So let's move on to the officers. So now Roberts, and by the way, I do cite Roberts in every slide here that it applies. So you can, if you need to take a screenshot of that, you can always feel free to do that. But Roberts talks about officers that this article should be very detailed in how officers are elected, whether they're appointed. You have to list them in rank order. So you don't list the vice president before the president. That just, doesn't really make sense, does it? Right? And you have to be real specific in terms of the duties. Let me just make sure okay, get that out the way. Sorry. And it's always advisable to have a little, and I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes for a catch-all phrase that says such other duties applicable to the office as prescribed by the parliamentary authority adopted by the society. That's just that, that familiar language you've heard before, especially in your job description at work, that other duties as assigned. That's what this clause really does mean. And it's always advisable to have here in your bylaws. You should also prescribe the method of the nominating the officers and how the nominating committee puts forth a slate. And last but not least, you should also talk about how officers are elected. Should it be by ballot and include their terms of office? Now, you can include a provision to dispense with the ballot when there's only one candidate. However, you have to understand that this will deprive members of the privilege of voting for write-in candidates. So if you want to do the election by any other means, such as by mail, plurality vote, preferential voting, you have to expressly state it here in the bylaws and also include the details. So you have to understand what the group wants to do and be very specific. So that's why I talked about, the language and the wording. The next article is meetings. Talk about the meetings should fix the day on which the meetings of the society are to be held, but not the hour and the place. So you can put the third Friday or the fourth Saturday, but we should know that it's at the bingo hall on 5th and Market, right? That's just an example. And this article should also talk about when the annual meeting is and special meetings, who has the authority to call the special meetings and how much notice should be given. This article should also contain the quorum for all the meetings. So can someone put in a chat, what does a quorum mean? We throw this term around all the time, but what is a quorum? And I'll wait a minute for someone to put that in the chat if you can. It should also provide for the changing or canceling meetings in an emergency. And we've seen this played out right through the pandemic when you either had to, switch to a virtual electronic meeting and who had that authority. Do I have any responses to what is
You're
the
getting,
quorum?
you're getting a couple of responses. The minimum number of members required to be present in order to transact business, the number needed to have a meeting, the specified number of members required to be present to conduct business, minimum number of members to conduct business, how many people
Absolutely.
in a meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Great job, everybody. All right, so let's move on to the executive board, right? So the article
Ellen?
here, yes.
I just want to just clarify one thing. So some of the responses that are in the chat are actually not accurate. So I just wonder if you could address that with the correct answer for those who
Absolutely.
may
The
not have
correct
gotten it
answer
correct.
is the quorum is the number of members who must be present in order for business to be validly transacted. So I hear what you're saying, Madam President. I did hear somebody saying something about, yeah, there were a couple of incorrect responses. So does anybody have any questions about that? So the quorum is the number of members who must be present in order that business for your organization to be transacted. Not just, to meet, to transact business. Okay.
And is that usually a percentage of the total amount of members?
Well, I mean, you define it, right? You define your quorum. I mean, people can,
okay.
People can, make their own suggestions, but, as I talked about earlier, your society defines its own rules, right? So whatever the quorum is you want for your organization, that's what it will be.
So
Oh.
Miss Reaves, Priscilla Murphy from Wilmington, Delaware. So we have like 45 members in our local chapter, and we made our quorum 11 because probably about 15 of those 40 are always there to conduct and transact the business of the chapter. So you have to look at that so you can continue to move your chapter forward with the quorum that you know you're going to have.
Right, and so thank you for that. And one of the things to be careful when you do a percentage, right? Because you may never reach that percentage, or that may be a moving target. So this is why you either have to, set the number, right? Or you have to say certain officers, whatever it is you want to say, you just have to be specific and be careful about the percentage, because if your membership fluctuates, that percentage is going to fluctuate, and it's going to be challenging for whoever the presiding officer to calculate it every single time, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I'm going to move forward because there's a couple of things I want to make sure we get to. So the article on committees should talk specifically about the standing committees, should name them, their composition, who selects the chair, talk about who can appoint special committees or if there's additional ones, and also talks about, the president being ex officio a member of the committees except the nominating committee. Article 8 is the parliamentary authority, right? It talks about how the society should name the manual, whether it's RLNR, whether it's AIP, whatever manual they want to reference when issues come up regarding procedure. It should really state it expressly here in this article, okay? And I have some suggested wording of how to craft that, right? And how it shall govern the society in all cases, which, so it's not inconsistent. And the last suggested base article, because remember, this is your foundation, right, is the amendment of the bylaws, right? How they're amended, who can put forth these amendments, what type of notice. It should also require that advance notice at a previous meeting, because if you don't detail this information, what happens is someone will be able to make amendments at every single meeting, and it can be very chaotic. So you should say, in March and, November of every meeting, we'll do the amendments. So keep that in mind. I want to get to the practice, and I'm running low on time. All right, if I can have a bylaws committee chairman and a chair of the organization. Can I have 2 volunteers so we can go through this?
Member Connie will
Angela?
be BC chairman.
Okay, and I'll just need one other person.
I'll do it,
Can I have a
Ellen.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, if our bylaws committee chairman will begin, go ahead.
The committee appointed to draw up proposed bylaws has agreed upon the following draft and has directed me to move its adoption.
And to read.
By direction of the committee, I move the adoption of the bylaws.
The question is on the adoption of the bylaws as proposed by the committee. The committee chairman will now read the proposed bylaws, one article or one section at a time. After each article or section is read, it will be open to debate and amendment. When amendment of one article or section is completed, the next one will be read and considered. No section or article will be adopted until all have been open to amendment. The entire set of bylaws is now open to amendment. Are there any further amendments? Hearing none, the question is on adoption of the bylaws as amended. Those in favor of the motion, say aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is a sample of a brand new set of bylaws being adopted for a new society. Now, no second is necessary because technically the bylaws committee is putting this forward, right? And again, each article and section is read separately. And the bylaws committee chairman would go through each one, right? Remember, it's one after the other and open each up for amendment. Okay, so let's move on to interpretation of the bylaws. So the first one that Roberts talks about is each society decides for itself the meaning of its bylaws, right? When it's clear, a society can't change its meaning except by an official amendment. You can't just, 1 month decide you're going to do this whole preemie baby thing, and then the next month you're going to do credit counseling. So when you are writing bylaws, you have to consider, the intent of when and what's going on at the time that they're being adopted. So the second thing to take into consideration when you are interpreting your bylaws is when a provision is susceptible to 2 meanings, one which is kind of absurd and the other one isn't, the one that isn't absurd really should be taken for the true meaning. And I provide an example for you here. So the bylaws define the delegates as all of the elected officers or their alternate member, which is selected by a majority vote. So let's just assume that under the fee section in the bylaws, it says all the delegates get reimbursed for their expenses. Now, for someone to suggest that the alternate members, their expenses are not reimbursed, this would conflict because the bylaws have already indicated that an alternate member can also be a delegate. So if they incur those expenses, they should also be reimbursed. So that's just an example when you have 2 meanings in 2 different sections. So let's move on. A general statement is of less authority, or rule is always of less authority than a specific statement. And here's my example. So the bylaws prescribe that any undergraduate student of a 4-year institution can be eligible for membership in this society that we're talking about. Now, this statement would yield to something else in section 5, which says that youth membership has to be 25 students per college. So when you have 2 different sections in your bylaws that talk about the same information, you have to make sure they're consistent and they're congruent, right? Because if you have 25 students per college in one section, but then you talk very generally about, any 4-year, any undergraduate in a 4-year institution is eligible, you're going to have an interpretation issue that's going to have to be decided sooner or later. Keep that in mind. The next one, if the bylaws authorize certain things specifically, other things of the same class are thereby prohibited. So my example talks about the Finance Committee chair is a member of the Conference Planning Committee and also attends those meetings in this society. Now, that does not mean that the Budget Committee chair is also part of the Conference Planning Committee just because they're both on the same board of directors. So the Finance Committee chairperson is of the same level as the Budget Committee chair. But just because one is part of another committee doesn't automatically give the authority for the other one to be part of the same committee. So you have to, again, be mindful of this when you are writing your bylaws so that the interpretation is not necessary and that it's very clear. That's what we're going for, clarity. The next interpretation principle is a provision granting certain privileges carries with it a right to a part of the privileges, but prohibits a greater privilege, right? So in this example, the bylaws grant the president the authority to appoint an interim officer, right? Because the previous one was unable to continue serving. Does not give the president the authority to fill a vacant office, right? This is just a temporary authority for the president, right? They don't get a greater privilege to appoint a permanent person for that position. I hope that's a good example for you guys. So moving on. This other principle of interpretation, a prohibition or limitation prohibits everything greater than what is prohibited, or that goes beyond the limitation, but it permits what is less than a limitation and also permits things of the same class that are not mentioned. So this basically says if you have, in my example here, if a bylaw limits an elected officer to membership on 2 standing committees, that means that they can't then join a 3rd standing committee. They can join 1 standing committee or 2 standing committees, right? Or they can go to a special committee instead of a standing committee. So things can be of the same class. It just can't be greater. You can't give somebody, greater authority, we'll say, right? If you have this prohibition in your bylaws. Number 7, the imposition of a definite penalty for a particular action prohibits the increase or diminution of the penalty. In this example, if the bylaws state that a youth member must maintain a GPA of 3.0 or greater, right? A GPA of 3.0 or will be immediately suspended, the youth advisor can't waive the suspension nor add to the penalty and remove them as a member. So you basically have to carry out the penalty exactly the way it's worded. They can't do more or they can't do less. And I think this is the last one. In cases where the bylaws use a general term and also 2 or more specific terms that are included under the general one, a rule in which only the general term is used applies to all the specific terms. So for example, if the bylaws provide under the article for committees that there are standing committees, there are special committees, and stakeholder committees, and you have somewhere else in your bylaws, you refer to just quote unquote committees, it covers all 3 of those. So that's just how the general term will apply to all 3 of those committees if you talk about it elsewhere in your bylaws. So I wanted, as we come to a close, I have about 10 minutes left. As we come to the end, I wanted to give you some language pointers, right? Again, the whole premise here is to keep it simple, make sure your language is clear, right? So clarity is very important. Be consistent in the language that you use. Be consistent in the tone that you use, right? Use plain English, very simple, right? And redundancy, you really should avoid it. So for example, if you have a very detailed section of your bylaws, it talks about your officers and repeat it somewhere else. So you want to avoid redundancy. Now, I want to talk a second about the word shall and may. And if I have any lawyers or legal professionals on the call, you'll appreciate this, because there is a difference, right? Especially in law, it's very important to be intentional with your wording. Shall means it's enforceable. May, that's that gray area. It says maybe you can do it, maybe you can't do it. So you want to be very intentional that, you know, in terms of your authority, this person shall do this, that's their duty. Or you can say may. Just keep in mind that when it comes down to interpretation, you may have that gray area. And I want to talk about the wording and your punctuation, right? So just so you know, bylaws is never hyphenated. You've seen it, and some of you may have done that, but just understand, it's one word, right? And ex officio, there's a difference when it's hyphenated and when it's not hyphenated. So for example, ex officio is not hyphenated when it's used as a noun. And I'm getting some feedback right now. So I'm going to repeat that. Ex officio, when it's not hyphenated, it's used as a noun. So for example, an ex officio, a member of all committees. But it is hyphenated when it's used to modify another word, meaning an ex officio member. And if I've made you crazy with grammar, I apologize. But I just wanted people to understand that there's a difference. So for example, 2/3 is not hyphenated, right? When it's used as a noun. But when it modifies another word, as in 2/3 vote, it is hyphenated. So that's why you have to be, you know, you need to just be very intentional of who proofreads your bylaws document, so that you are in compliance with all the grammar rules. So I wanted to get to this point where we can practice a little bit. This is the interpretation practice that I wanted everyone to be able to take a look at. So I'm going to give you a minute to read it, and then I'm going to ask the question. So this is a sample article about members. It talks about general members. There's section 2. We have section 3, which talks about the dues, and section 4 is the additional assessments. So here's question number 1, and I want everyone to answer in the chat. And then you need to tell me why you answered that way, because I'll pick on you. So due to COVID-19, there has been no conference for 2 years for this society. May the members be assessed $50 this year for the annual conference due to an increase in expenses? That's question number 1. Yes or no? May the members be assessed $50 for the annual conference this year due to an increase in expenses? Can anyone tell me what?
You're getting a lot of no's. You got a yes, a couple more no's.
Okay, so the no's have it, but I need to know why. If someone can tell me why, which one of the, it applies to one of the principles, right, of interpretation. Can anyone tell me why? You can come off mute and tell me why.
This is Winnie Brinkley. Is it because they must attend the annual training conference?
Say that again. Is it because they must actually attend?
Yes.
No, that's not it. But good,
Okay.
good try. Anyone else?
Is it because the word may, so do we let them or do we not? May the members, you're asking us a question and it's not clear. So
Nope.
is it that wordy?
Good try though. No, but that's not it. It's not my
Okay.
question. But I like that. That was pretty good. No, so let me give you the answer. The reason is because in this bylaw, there's already a prohibition that you only assess $25. So you can't assess them more than what the bylaws say. Okay. So let's move on to question number 2. The state of Delaware, because remember, this society has members in each state, the 4 states listed, right? And question number 2 says the state of Delaware has 24 members. My question is, may a unanimous consent be applied to allow a retired veteran and his daughter from Delaware to become members? Yes or no?
Section 2 states that there shall be no more than 25 general members from each state. And so the two of them would make it more.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. So you're right. A general statement is always of less authority than a specific statement. And in this example, there's a specific statement that you can only have 25 members, and you're right, that would put them over. Very good. So let's do one more. So in this section, it talks about the biannual meeting of the association, when it is. It talks about the annual meeting, and it talks about the quorum, right? How many members constitute a quorum. The question is, the executive board of this society postponed the annual meeting scheduled for the second Tuesday in October to the third Tuesday in November because not enough delegates were registered to make a quorum. My question is, did this executive board have the power to postpone that meeting? Yes or no? Anyone?
No, they do not have the power to postpone it.
Can you tell me why?
It's not stated here in any section that they can do that. It says section 2 rather, the second Tuesday in October shall be known as the annual meeting.
So basically,
About section 3, the quorum.
Yeah. The other answer is that the society has not given the executive board that power.
Right.
bingo, you're absolutely right. So whoever said it first, you're right, you were correct. And the gentleman just kind of expanded on it. You're right. This particular society has not given the executive board that authority to postpone those meetings. Awesome, awesome. All right. So I have a last little review. So number one, what are the basic bylaw articles? You can just kind of unmute and tell me a couple.
No, mommy, see pop.
Right.
I love it. No mommy, CPA. Absolutely. All right. Number two, in which articles would the quorum provision be found?
In meetings.
Article on meetings.
And what else? There might be another one.
Finance.
Special meeting.
No, in the executive board section.
Yes.
They would have their own quorum.
Right.
Number three, which article would state the purpose of the organization?
Article
Objective.
1.
Objective.
Article
Right.
2.
It would be the object, correct. All right, next question. What is the vote requirement for adoption of an initial set of bylaws?
Majority.
Majority.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. You guys have been paying attention. And the last question. Can the location of the meetings be found in the bylaws?
No.
Where
No.
would they be found?
Standing rules.
You guys are the bomb. I am so excited. Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Look, and I have 30 seconds left. This is a miracle that I've actually got through my presentation with time to spare. Any questions? Stop sharing. I don't know. Can I ask my tech team? You had any questions, any comments?
We do want to go for another 5 minutes so that everyone can earn that CEU credit.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Oh, that's my little timer for myself.
I'm not seeing any
other
questions. I'm not seeing any questions, but people can go off mute if they want.
Yeah, please come off mute and tell me, what other, now that you're thinking about it, are there any other bylaws articles that you've seen that that your organization may have that we didn't talk about?
Demonstration.
Some organizations have a preamble.
Absolutely, that's right. A preamble sometimes would put the name and all of that in it, so you wouldn't have to have that first article if they have a preamble. Yes. Anything else you've seen?
What's a stronger law, RP Reeves, your bylaws or your parliamentary authority?
Oh,
Good question.
that is a great question. Now,
Mhm.
let's unpack this a little bit, right? So your bylaws, if you remember the hierarchy of rules, right? Your bylaws technically are of higher authority, but they could be silent, right? They could be silent. They could not speak to certain things. So then you would refer to your parliamentary authority, right? For clarity. So I hope that answers your question.
I like RP Kip's answer.
I know.
Smooth
Kip's the man,
RP
right,
Reeves.
Anybody have anything else?
You got
I
a lot of
appreciate everyone
excellent great
coming.
presentation. Got a lot of comments. Just congratulations in the chat, RP Reeves.
Thank you. And you know what? I want to say, it was a parliamentarians of Hudson County. I attended a workshop a couple of weeks ago. It was excellent, right? About amending bylaws and revising the bylaws, right? That's a presentation for another day, but there is more to this, right? There's levels to this. So this just, again, gives you the foundation. This gives you a great way to start it, because you may not even be a brand new society. You might be a society that's been in operation for a little bit. Now you want to put together your structure and put your bylaws together. This gives you your foundation. This gives you your ingredients that you need to start that off. So go forth and bake. I'm so not a baker, but go forth and do what you will.
RP Reeves, may I
Yes.
ask a question as well? So I'm wondering if any of the folks on with us this evening have horror stories related to bylaws.
Oh,
I know.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Anything anybody'd like to share that maybe you want to see if something was done correctly or if it wasn't done correctly? You've got all these parliamentarians on the line who
Yeah,
can maybe
something
share
that's-
some insights with you.
Okay, so this is Priscilla Murphy from PKCD in Delaware. Horror story. The bylaws that were distributed to the body were never edited. And the bylaws are incorrect, and especially when it comes to nominating and other stuff. So you get to the convention and the bylaws are wrong. So we now will probably have to go back to 2019 because the 21s are inaccurate. And they never edit them before disseminating, and only half the organization received them.
But were they already adopted?
They were adopted.
Yeah, that's gonna be dicey.
But they never added the change, they never added the corrections, the new amendments before they sent them out.
Well, we had a wonderful presentation at our PA Association training conference, which hopefully some of you attended, by RP Twyla Jenkins on the importance of what?
Probably
Can anybody tell me how you can solve this problem?
Minutes.
The minutes, absolutely. Right? So you should be able to go back to your minutes and see which amendments were actually adopted, because that is something that is required to be documented in the minutes. It's going to take a little bit of work, but you should be able to recreate that if you find yourself in a situation like that. Always go back to your minutes.
Always, correct.
Absolutely.
So this is RP Rogers out of Jersey. So recently went to a conference, and that whole thing on quorum became a big issue, because the way they worded the bylaws, and when they made the change a year ago, I told them they'll never meet quorum. They made it, they worded it so it was 75 members plus 5 board members instead of 75 members, including the 5 board members. And because it said plus the 5, so wording is important, right? So because
Absolutely,
it said
that's
5,
that real specific. Yep.
Yeah, they didn't meet quorum. Had it said including the 5, they would have met quorum for the annual meeting. Therefore, we couldn't conduct any and vote on any of the other bylaw changes
Mhm.
that they were presenting because we did not have a quorum.
Yes,
Yep.
And
we
I
have
kept,
seen that happen.
which was off, yeah. And I
We're
kept telling
shaking our
them,
head.
wrong.
We're like, oh, that's tough. That's tough. That's why you want to stay away from percentages and like RP Reeves said, that vague language. Put a number. I like the participant that said 11. If 11 gets you there, use it.
You're right. And you can have 50 or more members, but you're right. If you're real confident, you'll always have 11, at least go with that, right?
Wonderful. And I did drop into the chat the specific language from RONR to address that question about how you set your quorum. So I just want to wrap us up for this evening by joining with everyone else, the sentiments in the chat that this was a great presentation. Thank you so much, RP Reeves, for taking the time to really study and to really be able to present this in a way that was accessible and understandable and interactive. We're so grateful to have you in our unit, and we look forward to our next presentation. I am going to ask, if you haven't already seen it, RP Ferrier has dropped the evaluation link into the chat. A very straightforward, quick evaluation. Please just take a moment and give us some feedback so we know what you liked and what you didn't like. We want to make sure that we are increasing your knowledge and your skills. So please just do that for us. And if you are so moved, we ask you to send RP Reeves an email to let her know how you felt about the presentation. She's building her parliamentary portfolio as well, and would love to have any kudos added to that from tonight's presentation. So I'm actually looking at now VP Reeves. Is there anything else we need to say before we let the people go for this evening, before we adjourn to our unit meeting at 8 p.m.?
No, but I do want to thank everyone that attended. I appreciate the well wishes. I really enjoyed putting this together. It was very educational for myself, our organization, and for those that are on the call that know, we just went through a complete revision. So this just kind of solidifies, and and you do something like that, it's gonna take time, right? You shouldn't rush through putting this together. So, yep. Appreciate everyone attending.
Thank you, RP Reeves. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to inviting you to our next presentation. If you're on tonight, you're going to receive an invitation to our next learning opportunity. And for the members of PBC, we will see you in the unit meeting Zoom at 8 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.